This is AJ Wachtel. Welcome to my podcast, Wachtelligence, where I discuss with my guests the past, present, and future of the local and national music scene with a focus on Boston and New England. Today's episode, Congregating with Preacher Jack, is about the legendary life and career of the Boogie Woogie Piano icon, Preacher Jack Coughlin from Malden, Mass., who had many residencies in many North Shore clubs for many years. Today's guest is Peter Levine, who managed and babysat Preacher Jack for decades. And I first met Peter and his brother Frank at the great nightclub Bunratty's in Allston, Massachusetts, and we hit it off right away because we were three Jews with tattoos. Welcome to Wachtelligence, Peter.
Those early Buns days, AJ, were quite a time. I remember going to the bathroom, coming back, and you and my brother Frankie were guzzling beers together. Frankie goes, you got to meet this guy AJ. He's got tattoos. He's a Jew. None of us can get buried in a Jewish cemetery, but we're gonna guzzle some beers. We became fast friends ever since. Saw you so many nights. AJ, Buns, the channel, saw you at the Rat, saw you everywhere because you were everywhere in those days. Yeah, great days.
Well, tell me how you got involved with Preacher Jack. I mean, because I was shocked. There I walk into this dive bar and you're sitting at the table.
Yeah, right. We hadn't seen each other in a
long time.
Long time. Yeah. So I became involved with Preacher. I became a fan in 1990. Bunch of us would go see him up at the Blue Star bar on Route 1. When Blue Star was rocking. He did a Sunday night residency up there, and a bunch of us would go up there, give him support. We lost touch with him for a couple of years after that, and probably like 5, 6, 7 years later, we heard he was a little down on his luck. We started getting him gigs. I started getting him gigs unofficially. Then his real manager, Al Cocorocchio, left for Memphis, Tennessee.
Al's still alive and is still in the music scene down there.
Al's still kicking it down in Tennessee, working for some of the biggest names in music down there. So he's still doing. Great guy, AJ. I took on a role as manager, and you hit it right in the nose, AJ. I was his manager, and I was his full-time babysitter also because he was a man-child, a brilliant musician, self-taught. But that's all he knew was music. It flowed in his veins, AJ. Amazing. I started booking him after Al left, and we went for a good 7, 8, 9 years before he became ill.
Well, there's a thin line between madness and genius. I remember for all those gigs in Quincy that he would be headlining, you would pick him up and take him home. And he lived in a hotel. And I remember that he was married and his wife paid for the hotel, right?
Well, he got married about 15, 20 years ago. They always live separately because both of them are very unique individuals and need their own space. The government paid for his hotel. He was on some sort of disability. She supported him by feeding him.
Right.
But the government paid for his hotel room, which he loved dearly and which he kept stacked with his books and drawings and all his paintings. And
he was called the preacher because he would sermonize during his sets and his music. He was a man that wore many hats.
Right. It stuck, I guess, before I knew him, sometime in the, late 60s, because he sermonized so much, the nickname Preacher Jack stuck. A funny story about that, we were doing a gig when I was managing him. We were doing a gig in Marblehead. Marblehead has a large Jewish population. We started the night, and the restaurant was full when Jack started playing. Immediately, he started sermonizing about the second coming, and Christ cleared the place out within minutes, AJ. Cleared it out within minutes.
I remember that it must have been a really difficult time for you to manage him sometimes when you had to deal with rowdy audiences screaming about his sermonizing and saying, more music, more music. What was the worst time that ever happened, and how'd you deal with it?
Well, that was probably the worst time because we lost that gig. It was supposed to be a res. So we lost that gig there. But I'll tell you, AJ, most of the times there were friendly audiences. Most of the times there were people there that knew all about him and loved that shtick. You know, they might have thought it was a shtick, but Jack lived. He lived by, you know, his love of Jesus Christ. And all of that was coming from his soul. He was being honest about it. So most of the time, people really dug it, you know, and they expected it. And that was about the only time he ever suffered. There were a couple times when people would tell him, more music, more music. But he could adapt to any crowd. And AJ, I've never seen a better performer, entertainer. He could adapt to any crowd, a wedding crowd, a rowdy punk bar, whatever.
I've rocked at the bottom, I've rocked at the top, I rock for the boss, the waitress and waiter, rock for the people, I can't seem to stop, and 3,000 barrooms later. I boogie it fast and I boogie it slow, I've worked in the worst and the best of the clubs, giving the people my rock and roll show while rocking the lounges, taverns and pubs. The beauty and power of my three-chord style, I give the people the most that I can. I've worked the States and Canadian mile, I'm the Boston Boogie Woogie Piano Man.
Well, you know, he used to, I think you told me this years ago, he used to play residencies in a lot of North Shore restaurants and places. And one day George Thorogood walked in and they jammed for the whole night. I mean, geez, how cool is that? Can you tell me about that?
Yeah. So over the years, that story has gotten blown up a bit, kind of a mythic type of night. But yeah, George Thorogood used to see him at the Shipwreck Lounge when he first signed with Rounder Records. George was on Rounder Records. He would go into the Shipwreck. Jack had a residency there for like 8 years. He didn't know Jack at the time, but loved Jack. Became good friends with him. He was the one who introduced him to the guys at Rounder, Bill Nowlin, and got Jack signed. So I guess there was one particular night where Jack had he used to line up his 24 beer bottles, Budweiser bottles on his piano. And at the end of the night, he used to sweep them off into a big bucket. That was his finale. So I guess it was on one of those nights when Jack had a good load on. George was in there, and he coaxed George to get up. George had his harmonica with him, from what I was told, and jam with him for to finish off the night, the last half an hour or so. And they just like killed it. Like, mobsters used to go in there, AJ, and you know, it was just one of those type of places. Where
well, you know, how cool is that about the Boston music scene? You think shit like that happens in Butte, Montana?
Yeah, no, we were so lucky, AJ. You of all people, you probably seen it 1,000 times. I've seen it, not as much as you. But no, Peter Wolf isn't gonna be in Butte, Montana, and jump on stage. Or Willie Alexander's not going to do that. Or Joe Perry's not going to show up. Yeah, it was a special place, Boston.
You know, his Preacher Jack, one of his big idols was Jerry Lee Lewis. And I know he met Jerry Lee. He used to tell me about that. Yep. Why don't you tell me and expound on that, since you're the only one that can tell that anymore?
Well, yeah, he was friends with Jerry Lee. Jerry knew, they knew each other. When they would see each other, Jerry called him Jasper Jack. That was his nickname for him. So the first time they met, 1957, Jack, Al Cocorocchio, the guy named Matt, George Carpenter. They drove down to New Jersey to see him at a club. Yeah. They introduced themselves to him. They all became fast friends that night. They became such good friends. They went back to Jack's hotel after and were swimming in the hotel pool with Jerry Lee Lewis.
Jack
George
told
Allen,
me that.
Preacher Jack. And there's a famous picture. It's on the back of Jack's first album of that night with Jack with his arm around Jerry Lee. Jack has his cool pompadour. And you could see Jerry's back pocket. You could see a swimming trunk in his back pocket because they were all going swimming after they got back to the hotel.
It's
so it was really
hysterical.
cool. Yeah. AJ, every time that Jerry Lee would come into town, or in New England, Jack and all his friends would go and see him.
Mhm.
Frat houses. I've got pictures of Jack in the mid-'60s on top of Jerry's piano at a frat house at Wesleyan College, on top of the piano, just looking down at Jerry Lee. Yeah, it was amazing.
You know what can't be found, sitting home all alone. You can't come around, at least please telephone. Don't be cruel to a heart that's true.
What other celebrities used to love to see Jack, and who did he hang out with?
Well, I'll tell you. So some of the the great stories Jack would tell me that when he signed to Rounder, there was no budget, but they sent him up to Canada to do a tour of nightclubs. So he'd have like 12 dates in Canada. He'd have to schlep himself around. He was with, they provided no support. Him and his, at the time, manager, Jessie, his future wife, would rent a car, and they go from gig to gig. So he was telling me how John Prine was on the same circuit as him, but John would play like on Friday night, and Jack would play on Saturday. So they bump into each other on the way to the next gig at the next coffee house or the next breakfast place. The next morning, they would see each other. They would smoke weed, tell stories, and then on to the next gig. So they would do that for like, Jack told me, he ran into him like 10 times going to the next gig. And all the time, they always had the best, John always had the best weed, he said, too. Yeah. John, go ahead.
No, I was just saying that I was just going to go and mention the fact that you said that there was a photo of Jerry Lee and Jack on one of his albums. How many albums are there out there of Preacher Jack?
Okay, so I have a what is it called? Discography. I have a discography somewhere, and I think I can remember it. So he released 2 vinyl records with Rounder. About 15 years ago, Rounder released a double CD of those 2 albums. On CD, of course.
Right.
A single of his is circulating that was manufactured in France of one of his songs. He recorded an album, a CD of all instrumentals with, what was his name? I forget his name at the moment. But it's a CD of all instrumentals. He recorded a gospel album with Al Cocorocchio, gospel CD at the some church in Cambridge, a well-known church, all his gospel stuff. And finally, his last one was, we got signed to Cow Island Music back in, and we released a CD on Cow Island Music. That was his last recorded music. But to tell you the truth, AJ, so that's like 5, 6, 7 things you can get on eBay.
Is there anything else? I mean, do you have any recordings, live or studio, roaming around in your archives that may see the light of day sometime in the future?
Well, I've talked to a few people about doing something like that, AJ. Because
who owns the rights now?
Who owns the right? Whoever owns the film owns the rights. Whoever owns the video recording from that night owns the rights to his image, I guess.
What about his songs? What about his recorded music?
Yeah, AJ. he only wrote 1, 2, maybe 3 songs in his whole life that were recorded.
I know. One of them is my favorite, the Preacher's Boogie Woogie.
Oh, Preacher's Boogie Woogie is a fabulous one.
Do you think that every song that he plays is really just a variation of Preacher's Boogie Woogie in a different tempo?
Everything he does is either Albert Ammons or Pete Johnson or Jerry Lee Lewis. It's
or
all
Metalux.
What's that?
Or Metalux.
Lux Lewis.
Yeah.
Oh, him. And, and he ripped off Liberace, a lot of Liberace.
Yes, it's being I'm in love again. Ain't had no loving since you know when. You know I love you, baby, yes I do. Saving all my loving, baby, just for you. I need your loving, honey, I need it bad. Like a preacher when he's going mad. Ooh-wee, baby, ooh-wee. Baby, don't let your hound dog bite me.
I heard him play for me once on top of Old Smoky, a few bars of that, and it was just like Ammons or Metalux Lewis would have played it. Yeah. What's the strangest song you ever heard him play?
Strangest song I ever heard him play. Well, I heard him play so many times. I was so surprised so many times, AJ. He plucked these songs out of his rear end that I'd never heard. I must have heard, 1,000 different tunes from him. He'd surprise me constantly. But I will be honest, the last couple of years, he had it on kind of like autopilot, and he'd do the same set constantly. But he introduced me to Clara Ward, and he introduced me to Lux Lewis and Pete Johnson. So whenever he'd play any of that stuff, I mean, what the freak is this stuff? I've never heard it before. He's turning me on to this 40s and 50s boogie woogie that us white kids from Malden never heard before.
Yeah.
So all that blew me away.
Well, you say that, white kid from Malden, it blew you away. You remember I used to bring Harrison, my underage teenage kid, in all the time. And him and Preacher between sets would sit around in a booth alone and talk about past presidents, history, and life in general. And he was so mild-mannered. Did you ever see him get pissed off?
He was a very mild-mannered guy by nature. There wasn't a mean bone in his body. He was the most honest man I've ever known in my whole life, AJ. But he did have a side to him that was lurking, and I say to myself, I'm glad I wasn't around during his drinking days, because I heard that monster came out on a few occasions during his drinking days.
And what would happen?
What's that?
And what would happen?
Yeah, he would just lose his mind. He'd become a different person. Lose his mind. He's 6'3", AJ. And those steely blue eyes of his, they penetrate you. And I saw it a couple times. And even he had me back on my heels because he was in that state of mind. And he gave me that stare a couple times. As, okay, this isn't the mild-mannered Jack I know. I'm just going to take a couple steps back, wait for him to calm down. And he snaps right out of it. But, he had a different side.
Hey, it must have been difficult managing Jack at times.
Yeah, it wasn't easy, AJ. He didn't own a cell phone. He didn't own a TV.
Or a car.
He didn't drive. AJ never drove, never got a license. Couldn't shop for himself, didn't own a credit card. He was just like one of those pure, true artists from like 100 years ago. Just could not do many things for himself and needed. So I would do everything for him. The babysitting thing is I would do his shopping for his clothes for him. I'd have to be his transportation. I did his accounting for him. It was difficult at time because he'd have to call me from a phone booth. I'd have to call the hotel, AJ. leave a message downstairs at the lobby. Hey, if you see Preacher Jack, tell him to give me a call back. It was that type of thing. Yeah.
Busted flat in Baton Rouge, waiting for a train, feeling about as faded as my jeans. Bobby flagged a diesel dive before a little bit of the rain took us all the way to New Orleans. I pulled my harpoon from my dirty red bandana, feeling good while Bobby sang the blues. Windshield wiper slapping time, holding Bobby's hand in mine. We sang every song that driver knew. We sang every song that driver knew.
Hey, why don't you tell me two quick funny stories about Preacher Jack that you think that still make you laugh all these years later?
All right, so let's see. There was the time in Walpole. We were playing in this auditorium full of a couple hundred people, and he was supposed to only play 50s rock and roll. So Jack is freaked out because, wow, I've got an audience of 200 people that listen to everything I play. I'm not going to play this 50s rock and roll that I've played a billion times. I'm going to turn them on to some gospel. So he starts playing in Mahalia and Clara Ward, and then he starts throwing in the Boogie Woogie. And I'm in the back laughing because I know he's never going to be hired to play in Walpole again. So I'm just laughing and getting a kick out of it. He walks out after the gig, and the guy who hired him is pissed. And I'm just in there laughing, and the crowd loved him. The crowd was standing on their feet, giving him a standing ovation. And I'm laughing, and the guy who hired him is like, Jack, what did you do? You were supposed to say 50. Jack just shrugged his shoulders and said, hey, the spirit overcame me. I just found that hilarious that he would jeopardize that night's gig by playing his stuff, his gospel stuff. Yeah, that was a funny night. There was a night at we played Willie Alexander's 70th birthday party. And
Willie Alexander, for people who don't know, is a legendary local Boston punk musician that had a short gig with what was that famous band he was in?
He was when Lou Reed left Velvet Underground.
He was in Velvet Underground, right.
Yeah, but he's been around since the 60s. He's part of the Bosstown sound. He's still gigging to this day.
And him and the Preacher, at the end of the Preacher's life, were gigging a lot together, playing piano together, which is very cool.
Those were some of the best nights ever with Preacher. When Willie would show up, Willie would open for him, and they'd end the night together, jamming on the same piano. It was incredible.
Yeah,
incredible, once in a lifetime. You're not going to see it in Butte, Montana. Stuff like that, AJ.
I hear you.
So we're doing Willie's birthday, and Jack is in a different zone. He's hanging with Barron's Whitfield, and he's
another great local soul screamer.
Soul screamer, yes, incredible. He's hanging with the Boston Globe music critic Steve Morse, legendary music critic. He's hanging with all the big names in Boston music. And I never saw Jack so happy in his whole life. That was a night I'll never forget. So Jack gets on the stage for one song. Everybody was doing one song in tribute of Willie. It went on for like 15 minutes, and it was difficult to get him off the stage. I had a signal that I would give him when I wanted him off the stage. AJ, he called off my signal at least 10 times. That's it, Jack. That's it, signal. Called it off like 10 times, and I could see Willie looking at me and laughing. We're laughing. Jack just kept on going, and it was that was a fun night. Fun night.
Preacher Jack recently passed away in a nursing home. How should, he had COVID, and that's just so sad. What do you think, how do you think Jack should be remembered?
AJ, if anybody, okay, I can't sum it up in the time that we have, but if anybody's truly interested in how Jack should be remembered, I'll go into it a little bit. Well, I know we have time constraints, but I wrote I'm a freelance writer for a local newspaper, and I wrote about 3 or 4 pretty detailed articles when Jack passed away, on Jack's life and how I feel he should be remembered. You can Google them by Googling my name and Preacher Jack together, and you'll pull up these articles. But the gist of those articles were that, like all of us, AJ, and I'm sure you'll agree, we're all flawed, okay? None of us are perfect. Jack was not a perfect human being, but he gave his whole life to entertain people and bring joy into people's lives, to bring happiness into people's lives. He touched so many people's lives over the course of his career, and it was lengthy. His first gig was 1957. So he was in the music biz for a good 55 years. He brought so much joy into people's lives that it's immeasurable, AJ. So given Jack's flaws, given that none of us are perfect, that's how he should be remembered, for the joy he brought into people's lives, AJ.
Very cool. Very cool. Thanks for the great stories you shared about Preacher Jack, Peter, and thanks for being on Wachtelligence.
Love you, AJ. Sei gesund.
I've got to live the life I sing about in my song. I've got to try to do what's right, always shun the wrong. I can't go to church and shout all this Sunday, go out and get drunk and raise sin on Monday. I've got to live the life I sing about in my song.
Thank you so much, AJ, for keeping Jack's memory alive, and for such a great interview. It made me very comfortable talking to you, and I really appreciate that people like you are keeping Jack's memory and his music alive. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Wachtelligence. You can connect with me on Facebook at Wachtelligence. Thanks to my producers, my son Harrison and David Schwartz, and Harvey Brooks for my theme song. Don't forget to subscribe.
I don't care what you think of me. Don't need no jailer to set me free. Don't want strangers filling up my cup. Don't need no advisor to show me down from up.